You ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we are live there and there. Okay. Hey, Neil, you're the last one in. You want to pray for us today?
Sure. Joel, thank you so much for this opportunity again. We pray that you will give us wisdom and knowledge as we speak about these topics, and that the things we say will be from you, will be your truth. And we pray that the people listening will gain great knowledge, and not only that, but be able to use it in witnessing and in glorifying your name in our community and in our nation and in our world. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Okay. Today's topic is we're in chapter 2 with Kevin's book, and we're talking about being woke up. And it is our discussion on who let the dogs out. So if you've not had a chance to read the book or, get this information we're going to read and share with you about that. And just, sounds like I am multitasking. I'm trying to ping some other people into the room so that we can. Shirley Love, thank you for joining us. If you have the time, we'd love for you to stay as we continue our conversation on being woke up. Who were some of the other people? Oh. Okay. So I like the quote that you start out with in your second chapter. It's from Denzel Washington. It says, with so many things coming back in style, I can't wait until morals, respect, and intelligence become a trend again. And that's a quote from Denzel Washington. What I want to do is, because we're talking about the power of words. So I'm going to read a couple portions from Kevin's book, and then we're going to get into discussion. Back in the day, Who Let the Dogs Out was a very popular song. Even to this day, the song plays in various venues. All right. And for me, this has a personal and cultural poignant meaning. On the personal side of Who Let the Dogs Out reminds me of a time when I owned an Akita dog. Her name was Sparkle. She was an incredible specimen and a stunningly beautiful beast, in quotation marks. The reason why I call her a beast is while she was a wonderful and loving to any human she met, she was a literal killer for all other dogs she came into contact with. She had to be leased or she would harm any other dogs in the vicinity. One day she was unleashed, jumped over my backyard fence, and went hunting for other dogs. Unfortunately, she found a neighbor's dog running free and she pounced, killing the dog instantly. When an awesome force is unleashed, it can have terrible and profound consequences. The resulting carnage can sometimes be incalculable. I have no doubt that every one of my neighbors who saw and heard the brief encounter my dog had with the other dog still lives with the unforgettable horror about the encounter that day, including myself. Who Let the Dogs Out still rings in my ears, but not for its catchy tune and hip melody. It rings because it brings back memories of my dog Sparkle, my beautiful beast, wreaking havoc when she was unleashed. Racism and white supremacy are awesome, sinister forces that have long been unleashed. They are not figments of imagination. They have proven to possess extraordinary powers that kill, steal, and millions of people have been killed. Trillions of dollars have been stolen from economies, and entire civilizations have been squandered and destroyed due to unleashing of racism and white supremacy. At a ancient evils like racism and supremacy can be brought forth and unleashed. Is there such a thing as unleashing evil that pre existed? Certainly. When new distinctions are brought forth, previously unknown or unthinkable possibilities can be instantly created. This can generate context and possibilities for action that accelerate and instantiate social cultural changes. In essence, words matter. Okay. I do think it's important to read this next section about words matter, and then we're going to get into this discussion about the power of words. So, new possibilities of thought and actions are created via linguistic distinctions, created words. Remember, God framed our world by just speaking it into existence. Similarly, we can frame new concepts, ideas, actions, and perspectives through our words. This is not trivial. Human beings use linguistic distinctions to create, change, and differentiate the world with new possibilities for actions. This awesome human capacity has led to tremendous innovations and positive change. But there have also been distinctions that were created and, when unleashed, brought forth a world bearing significant negative changes. Metaphorically, reflecting on the situation with my dog, when something is leashed, it is tethered, held back, and restrained, and from that point can be controlled. Conversely, the act of unleashing unlocks and removes constraints, allowing what was previously unleashed to freely roam uncontrolled.
This applies to all domains. It is true for our physical world, i.e., my dog being unleashed, our thoughts, unleashing the mind to embrace unlimited free thinking and new possibilities, and language. Language empowers people to make due distinctions that then provide a world of new possibilities and actions. So let's start there. We'll go to Kevin, Lonnie, and Neil. Your thoughts on what it means to unleash the power of words.
Yeah, so this is a basic human capacity. And so when we create new words, like even wokeism is a created word just over the past several years. When we create new words, then we have to be responsible for the potential consequences of those words as well, or the phraseology or the philosophy. So all of these created distinctions will fall into either words directly, philosophies, or new paradigms. They're all created in the same way. And essentially, what happens is you have people who have some level of notoriety, and when those people who are respected and known bring forth a new word, a new distinction, a new type of philosophy, the others who respect that person will tend to then repeat the word, phraseology, philosophy, whatever, and then you begin to get a groundswell of a new distinction, a new created order, a new way to maneuver and to act and to be. And this is exactly what happened with the inculcation, the instantiation, if you will, of white supremacy and racism in America. Now, the reason why I say that, no doubt we had supremacy from the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. It's a malady of the heart. It happens where people just don't like people because they're from a different tribe, they're from a different ethnicity. Tribalism certainly has been with us from the beginning of time. And then when you look at slavery was in full swing when this particular person created a distinction of white supremacy and racism. So, but we have to understand that slavery was an economic, opportunistic thing. It wasn't scientifically justified in any way. And the people that were practicing supremacy over others via slavery were doing it based on cultural, economic, type of things, types of traditions. So what's interesting about who we talk about, Charles Darwin, in the book, is that we have the prominence of a worldwide figure who then instantiates white supremacy for the first time in human history. Did people practice supremacy over others? Yes, I'm not arguing that. But we didn't have a distinction of white supremacy until Darwin brought it into existence. And part of the way he brings it into existence is with his, scientific, he's well respected worldwide. So this is what he said. He
Kevin.
says, look, yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm good. Okay.
Yeah. But I don't want us to get into the scientific piece yet. That's going to be next week. Right now, we're gonna break down kind of just the power of words and how we've seen that, affect it.
Good.
Okay.
You got to stop me. You got to throttle me. You're right. I can go and go. All right.
Do you want to land your plane? I did.
I'll land the plane. I'll get these other brothers who got this incredible wisdom who's with us. Come on, let them get up.
Okay. Lonnie, share with us.
Sure. Thank you. He was going there, but I was taking copious notes. So we know when Kevin goes into the zone. But what came to mind for me as Kevin was speaking is he spoke of the power of words and what's written. And what occurred to me is the creator of all, where we all come from, the creator of all that we see here, the universe and everything that's beyond that we don't know about. Out of all the ways he chose to reveal himself to us, he chose words, the written word. Words have power, as Kevin so eloquently stated. And hence, what we have is what I affectionately or unaffectionately call the anti-God agenda is they would use words perverted to their own goals and agendas, and perverting of words, the words. So I am, you guys all know that I get excited talking about the merits of the book, but what's so crystal clear is when you can see the outline of when evil stepped in, which is what Kevin is speaking of, and began to pervert words to drive an agenda that would be unleashed on the world. And for those who have only a casual understanding of history, do not know how these things took place, because it didn't just come out of thin air. There was an agenda. So something good by the differentiation of ethnicities and so forth for identification purposes in the world, that was in turn perverted. And we have what we have today. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Cool. Neil.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? I'm checking my new mic here.
Very good.
Very good.
Okay. So I don't want to add. There's not much to add, but I'll just say I'll give a couple examples of how words are so powerful. The left is really good at that. They'll create a word, or they'll take a word and they'll co-opt it. A good example is the word conservative. The word conservative never meant what it means today. It used to mean the people who wanted to conserve forests and conserve basically what we call environmentalists today. So we, the people who want freedom and liberty, were called classical liberals. We want freedom, right? We were liberal about those things. Yet the left decided that they wanted to co-opt the word liberal, and they wanted to put on us, foist upon us, the word conservative, which was something that everybody hated. People hated those environmentalists at the time. So they kind of took everything and they turned it around, and they started calling us conservatives rather than what we are, which is classical liberals. And they took the word liberal because, hey, of course they're liberal. But in reality is they're not really liberal, and we're not really conservative. We are the ones who want freedom. So that's one example. The second example is red states and blue states. back when Ronald Reagan was running for president, if you go back and you look at it, you will see he had a blue wave. He won all the entire country except for one state, I think, with a blue wave, because back then the conservatives or the Republicans were considered blue states because we were not red being associated with communism. But again, the media around the late 80s decided they didn't like the fact that they were targeted with the red name. And so they changed it so that they became the blue and we became the red. So you can see how these things happen and how they happen. But it's all, again, the media trying to take the words. And then also another one would be when they try to make fun of people, extremists, right-wing extremists, they create these words, right? Conspiracy theories, another one. The CIA came up with that word. Anytime somebody got too close to the truth, they would just say, oh, they're just a conspiracy theorist, right? Now, that doesn't mean that there are people who have crazy conspiracy ideas, but this is the way that they target and isolate and mock and ridicule truth.
Can I say one more thing to that? Neil both guys made some excellent point, but to Neil's point, just recently, we see now they're trying to fashion a new order around conservatives and around MAGA Republicans. That was never a distinction, but it was a created one just in the past few weeks. MAGA Republicans, semi-fascists, fascists, and so now they're trying to create a caricature using words and tie it around the neck of those who are dissenting from, who are dissenters from, their party, which would be the leftist progressive Democrat Party. And so we see how words are being used to create straw men, caricatures, demonize, and these words are made up out of nothing. How do you now say ultra MAGA, MAGA Republican, and that really means something? And then you say, oh, what it means is fascism. Where do you get that from? I mean, it's just. So I hope we're all seeing how we play into this. And if you look at some of the latest, over the past several years, the terms, the names of the bills that are being passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, which did nothing against inflation. It was strictly for green energy. And they admit it. They said, look, we passed it, but it didn't, it's not going to have an impact on inflation. So they use these words because during, these times now where you have political seasons, they can also say, look, you voted against the Inflation Reduction Act, so you're against reducing inflation. So these words actually do have meaning. They can take on a new meaning by nefarious people who would unleash them for harmful things. And we see a lot of that almost daily now.
Yeah, another one is the Christian nationalism, right? You're going to hear that a lot. And they're going to use that to mean that, oh, we're like the Nazi nationalists. Right?
Exactly.
Explain how we got Christian nationalism, Neil.
Well, anytime a Christian wants to get involved politically or wants to bring righteous and moral ideas into our legislation, they call it Christian nationalism, right? And they're, oh, these Christian nationalists. Well, it's such an easy idea to refute. Well, if you take that, you'll realize that the entire founding fathers, the Declaration of Independence and everything was founded on, if you will, Christian ideas of morality, because the Judeo-Christian principles. So they would be Christian nationalists by this definition. And here's why I can say that. You see, because it's only the Judeo-Christian Bible that says all men are created equal. I've traveled around the world, as most of you know. I grew up in Africa, Sudan, Yemen, Ethiopia, Jamaica, and my parents are from India. And I can tell you, and I've studied all the religions. I teach apologetics. I've studied all the religions, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, go down the line, right? And I can tell you about it. But you'll notice that none of them say that all men are created equal, except for the Christian Bible. So the God of Hinduism, the 3 million gods of Hinduism don't. Allah doesn't. The Buddhism is actually an atheist religion, so there's no God there. You can go to Baha'ism and a bunch of other religions. And none of the pre-Christian religions or none of the Christians, the ancient, antiquated religions, ever show that all men are created equal unless they borrowed it from Christianity. So if you don't want Christian nationalism, then you lose inalienable rights. You lose the fact that all men are created equal. Good luck with that.
Wow. Okay. So we covered a whole span of things, but let's look at how, when you guys were talking, one of the things I thought about is we see that for us during this time, media is what really controls how we get information. And it is through media, and it has been media that has crafted perceptions in our culture. This is one of the reasons, like I lived in Vietnam for 5 years, and that was only recently. It wasn't a long time ago. And you can see the culture of the people is much different because of how their media restricts or controls the information that is put out. You can go to different countries, and that's one of the reasons they talk about the West and westernized culture, is because our media, so not just news, but television shows, commercials, they put out the agenda, right? So some of you might be old enough to remember black and white televisions, right? We might be able to remember black and white televisions. So what was the thing that everyone gathered around? I even remember people talking about how they used to gather around the radio, right? And the dramatization shows on the radio were the thing that people gathered together to listen to the news, to listen to different broadcasts and stories that came on, because media let everyone know what was acceptable, what was going on. And there was a time when we believed everything that media said. Now, there are always those who didn't, and thank God for those, because, we sometimes we call them tinfoil hats and things like that, but not so the case, because we realize that everything that media tells us now is not true. But there was a time when media set the stage for what was acceptable. When the dishwasher came out, and when the cars started to become popular, you would see them on television, right? Leave It to Beaver, Andy, the Griffith Show, right? All those shows that kind of crafted what it was like to live in a home. Where most of us are people of color here on the stage, maybe listening and replays, it might be different, but remember the Cosby Show.
Mm-hmm.
That set this kind of, wow, that black families could look like this.
Yeah.
And so media has always, and we say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So not only has just the word itself, but images are now crafting and have always crafted the way we view things. Pictures of Jesus, of always white, blue eyes, right? And that it can't be possible where he grew up. But that kind of crafted, and that gave power.
Yeah.
That gave power by perception. And so we can see how media, how words have changed and crafted our environment, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. And negative pictures and images can do some powerful work. Example, when the news media decided to air the way that blacks were being treated in protests, remember when the fire hoses were turned on and dogs were set on? It changed the nation when they could actually see
That's right.
what human beings were being faced with because of the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And that changed civil rights. And not that civil rights protests weren't happening. They were. But it was just not getting out there in the way that it wasn't spreading as much as when it started to become on television. And so words are very, very powerful in the way that they craft our ideas of a culture and society. And societies that have their media restricted have different beliefs about culture, about what is right and what is wrong. And so, what I want to do is open up the floor for Shirley, Yolanda, and Glenda. I'm going to invite you up to speak. If you have some questions or thoughts on the power of words and what we're discussing today. So if you want to come up and speak, great. Kevin, Lonnie, or Neil, you have anything else you want us to keep going on how we've seen the power of words affect our environment?
Regina, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Dr. Alveda King about those times, and I remember I was a youngster, but I remember the video, the footage of those being attacked by the dogs, and those it's etched in my mind. And I remember mentioning to me that she said that her uncle, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they understood the power of imagery as well, and that those historic marches that we remember that were televised when they were attacked, that was strategic on behalf of Dr. King and his associates, those valiant men and women who endured the dogs and the fire hoses and the batons and so forth. And so that though they paid a price, they knew that imagery would show America the depth and breadth of the evil of racism and bigotry. And it did have a resounding effect, not only throughout America, but throughout the world. And through their sacrifice, change was brought. So it really speaks to when the truth is made clear, people's hearts tend to change. And I found that, especially as it relates to what tends to happen is if it's not in their backyard or something directly affecting them immediately, they don't tend to want to get involved. But those who stand up and endure the slings and arrows that come when you stand up and speak truth can bring about much change. And so I think that's what we're doing as it relates to what Kevin has knitted together in this book, is showing us when we take a stand and we do speak truth, the slings and arrows may come. But once we understand that truth, I think it will resonate in the hearts and minds of the average person in this nation, if not the world.
Excellent. I have something to add to that. I think your observation about and you bringing in the abortion issue is really critical and current. It's a current issue. Okay, so we had Lila Rose on Dr. Phil, a week or two ago, about 10 days ago, maybe, and she confirmed that based on ultrasounds that all scientists have access to now. They didn't have it when Roe was.
Who's Lila Rose?
Oh,
Just in
okay.
case
So
you
Lila
don't know,
Rose is
yeah.
a pro-life activist, and she started Live Action. She is well known for standing up for life. And so Dr. Phil invited her on the show because of the overturning of the Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, and she was confirming with him what scientists now know because of the machinery that we now have. They didn't have when Roe was voted on, the abortion issue. So she confirmed that all scientists agree that life begins at conception because they can actually pinpoint that there's separate DNA. It's a scientific fact. And he says, no. That is pre-life. That is a fetus. And he tried to assert that using words again, that is something subhuman still. It is not a separate life yet. It is not a life form. It is not life. It is a fetus. It is pre-life. It is some kind of uh, you know a status in between. And so you see the use of words, because if he can characterize it that way and people believe his assertion that way, then they will say, yeah, see, so we're not doing any harm. It's not really a life yet and all that. Dr. Phil said it. He's a doctor. He knows. On the other hand, he understands that if people come to understand that life begins at conception, and it is a scientific fact, it's not debatable anymore because of the machinery and the equipment that we have. We know. If people come to believe that, then they will be more on the pro-life side and start to really even see more of a wave against the pro-abort side. So these people in these powerful positions understand how to use language to present or to posit their point of view and change hearts and minds with it, because that's where our whole context begins in language. And if we could kind of keep in control and manipulate language to the extent that we always get our point of view coming out on top, or our perspective more readily accepted, then that's what we'll do. And we see it in politics, we see it doctors, we see it all over now. But I think that's a wonderful observation of what's happened recently with trying to use and manipulate words so they don't really carry the power of what's real or what it really is intended to do.
Neil, I think you wanted to speak earlier. I saw you come off mic.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay. For the Alfred and Tracy, thanks for joining us today. And so we are talking about, from Kevin's book, Woke Up. We are in chapter 2, and we're reading on Who Let the Dogs Out. And basically, we're talking about the power of words and acknowledging that media has set the atmosphere for the way that we communicate. And even the printed word. So in the beginning, let's just talk about the Bible, okay? So we know that the Bible was written in Hebrew, and that we had in the New Testament age, we had a lot of Greek scholars. The language of communication was Rome at the time. So Greek was spoken, but so was Hebrew because of the Israel people. And many other people spoke Hebrew because that's how you did trade. That's how you moved across the world. Were there many other languages? Yes. When we look at our Old Testament written in Hebrew, there are words there. But when it gets translated, we find now that words have been substituted. Words that we didn't understand because we didn't know Hebrew. And so you're reading a concept, and then if you go back now and you study it through the Hebrew, you realize that there is a different meaning or a depth of meaning that comes out that was totally missing, which can affect the way that you think about a relationship with God or with Elohim, however you address the creator of the universe. So I think that printed words are just as powerful as the spoken words that we may hear when we speak to one another, we hear over the radio. And then television brings its own level of wordplay through pictures, videos, and images that set this foundation for how we perceive what is going on and what is acceptable. And to the extent that with movies or even with real life, we may see a video capture of a certain event and have a perspective about, we feel like that's all that there is to the story. And then when the whole story comes out, we're like, oh, now you could understand how that part played out. And I'm not just speaking about, don't just go to police brutality. I'm not just speaking about that. That in any place you can come into a movie midstream and not understand what's going on. Then you have to go back and watch the whole thing. Right. And so we can get snapshots of things that have been given to us, that have been cut up, like some of the bills that have been passed by our government saying, oh, this bill is entitled to do this. But then they never tell you about the 357 other pieces of legislation that they tagged onto that. All you hear is the main thing, like one issue that they want you to focus on, and whoever supported or opposed that, never realizing that there are 357 other laws that may have been the reason why people were supporting or opposing the bill. And so clearly understanding the information that has been given to us is important. It's very important, because as we begin to look at how racism and white supremacy have influenced our communities, influenced our feelings about each other in such a way that there is such animosity now between races over words. Words are now defining whether or not I will accept you or I will not accept you. Words are defining not whether you're going to be my neighbor or going to be my friend, or if I'm going to work with you. I mean, it's amazing what words are doing now to our community and our culture. And I know that Kevin wants to get into Darwinism and all of that, but we want to save that till next week when we talk about the power of the science and scientific agenda, because we could talk about COVID and vaccination. Yeah, Neil will love that part too. We can talk about all that next week, but we just want to kind of lay some foundation about what words have done between the races, between societies. So I close my mic and I open it up for anyone else to give comments. I'm going to invite others who have come into the room. If you have a thought that you'd like to share about race and the power of words, please feel free. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us. If you want to listen a little bit more, if you have a comment, just come off mic and we'll allow you to kind of jump in on our conversation. Kevin, you came off mic. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you here's the interesting thing about words. So all of those with dissenting point of views, dissenting, if you're not a leftist progressive ideological figure today, you're automatically being castigated as a white supremacist, even though your color just doesn't align with that. So now they're creating a distinction of white supremacy. Some people are. And they're overlaying it on to mean that anybody that is conservative or is a dissenting voice from leftist progressivism. And so even to the extent that I have been called a white supremacist by a family member. And so, we see how now these words are being used as a pejorative and in order to characterize or caricature people a particular way. And it's all happening in words. It makes no sense. It's all nonsense in the sense if, how can how can a dyed in the wool black man who's brother from the hood be called a white supremacist? It's just kind of crazy. But we're making allowances for that because we understand that the culture has shifted, and it really is embracing distinctions that really don't make sense, but they're allowing classification and characterization of people in a particular way, and so therefore we're allowing it to continue and for it to stand. And so that's another example of what's happening right now with how we're using words to create new possibilities.
The floor is open.
Thank you, Regina. This is Lonnie. I would add to what Kevin has stated that so if we're going to be defined as, though we're not melanin challenged, as a white supremacist, then we in turn must point the picture of who the true culprits of white supremacy are. And I believe Kevin has done that a supreme job of that in this book. And anyone that has not gotten a copy of the book that's listening in today, please do reach out and get your hands on a copy, because it lays down the history and points to who the true culprits are. So those that would call us white supremacists because we have a contrary view to the status quo, we're not in line with the very individuals that they identify as being pro-black, for lack of a better term. And so the true culprits are out there, and all the dots, or the breadcrumbs, if you will, lead back to Charles Darwin and Karl Marx. And anyone that has a modicum understanding of history should know that those individuals, in particular Karl Marx, and the links to socialism and communism and every fascist regime, what those regimes in turn did to those of us with the darker paint job, and carrying out the evils of those particular worldviews philosophically and politically.
That's something I've always been thinking about, and it'd be great to hear people's understanding. What does it mean to be a white supremacist? Because I feel like what I used to think about what a white supremacist was is not the same thing that's being explained now. In that, back when I was growing up, a white supremacist was generally only a white person who, not just any white person, but it was a group of people who believed that only white, Caucasian, so you had to be European Caucasian, right? Because you could be Italian, you could be German, you could be, and that's not what they were talking about. Right? That's not what they were talking about when they were talking about white supremacy at all. So then, let me stick with then. So then the white supremacist was the person who.
Okay, let me just get this correct here. The white supremacist was the person who was white. There was nothing mixed in, and that meant no Italian, no German, no Russian, no nothing. Like, it just white. And basically, I think in America, someone correct me on history if I'm wrong, that this is now We're not talking about Nazi and Hitler, because that was really about an ethnicity cleansing, as opposed to this white supremacy. This was about skin color and pureness of blood. But now, white supremacy seems to be something different. And so those people back then, when they were white supremacists, they just believed that anybody else did not own this country. I remember them talking about, all you Black people should go back to Africa. And I'm sitting here saying, do you know that Native American Indians had this land before you? So how is it that somehow now this is your country and everybody else should leave? And I remember, if you remember when maybe it was the 90s, when we really had to start addressing the Latino population. So signs were now in Spanish, and they were having, if you speak Spanish, press 2,
Right.
Espanol. And then I remember hearing people complain like, oh, this is America. If you come to America, you should speak English, and there was this thing, because we were making accommodations for another language and culture entering into our society. But now white supremacy is something different, something that seems so maniacal. Like, you're not really clear what it means to be a white supremacist anymore. Not that I'm trying to be one, but I mean, go ahead, Neil.
Well,
Go ahead.
Regina, white supremacist is anyone who doesn't agree with the left, right? That's all it is. It doesn't matter what you agree on or disagree on. If you're not for socialists, you're a white supremacist. If you're not for critical race theory or Marxism, you're a white supremacist. Because it's, as Kevin mentioned, it's just a name calling. We've created this name, and we're going to apply it to people. In the past, a white supremacist was someone who thought the whites were superior. Today, a white supremacist is someone who believes everyone is equal, right? If you believe everybody's equal and nobody should have special preference, you're a white supremacist. And that's because the left have taken those words and created the meaning, the new meaning for it. It's like the word phobic. If you were homophobic, normally it would mean you're afraid of homosexuals, right? But now homophobic just means that you disagree with homosexuality. It's just a new created word. And the left is very good at creating these words and adapting them to their purposes. And then the problem is that because they have the media, they've had the media till now, they can now force it upon us. And of course, now you see even dictionaries are changing the meaning of words. Look at the word for woman. It used to mean you were biologically a woman. Now it doesn't mean anything. In fact, even the Supreme Court justice has no idea what a woman is. But it used to mean something. It used to have a definition.
Wow. Wow. Comments or thoughts? Thank you for joining us, those of you who are in the VIP section. Daphne or Laura, do you have anything you want to say?
I'm just listening, Minister Regina, because this is interesting and I'm learning. So I'm just listening for now. Thank you.
Hello to everyone that's in the room. Hi. I am listening too. I'm out in the grocery, so I was pinged into the room. It's very interesting. So I would like to hear a little more about what you all are talking about. I just got on a few minutes ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay.
So let me reset just a little bit for a few of the people who just came in. We are discussing, we're in chapter 2 of Kevin's book, Woke Up. And the title for this particular room is called Who Lets the Dogs Out? And that's actually the name of chapter 2 in the book. And so Kevin shares the story of how he had a dog named Sparkle who loved humans but did not like other dogs. And so one day Sparkle got out and she killed another dog. And we began to, and so the idea of whenever he hears the song now, Who Lets the Dogs Out, he always thinks about what happened when he let his very powerful, beautiful dog, who was great with humans, but did not like other dogs, how something very tragic and horrible happened because the dog got off leash. And so now we are kind of talking about the power of words and how words have now been weaponized. But in a way, words were always weaponized. When we think about, let's go back to Adam and Eve. When the serpent spoke to Eve, he said, "Did God say?" you know, and from that moment, we have seen how words have shaped
Yeah.
a culture, have shaped the actions of people.
Yeah.
We can look all through the Old Testament and see how words change things. Now we know that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And so therefore we have the power to create with our words, just as he did.
Yep.
And he's given that to us.
Yep.
But what have we done with that? And so as we move through history now, we were talking about how media, before people used to gather around the newspaper, right? The printed article, news, mail was so important. That's how cities and states and outposts were connected. It was the mailman, right? It was the rider on the horse bringing the letters from wherever. Then we went to newspaper printing. Then we went to radio. Then we went to television. And now we have internet. And so this power of whoever controls the media controls the messaging that comes out.
Sure.
And we talked about it, a very significant event that we probably are all old enough to remember, when we saw the fire hoses, or when our parents saw, depends on how old you were, when the fire hoses were released on blacks as they were protesting, and German shepherds were released on those people. And that was first publicized when the war happened and they saw the Hiroshima bomb, when we saw the two Twin Towers fall in New York. Even now with COVID and what was being put out about that, about vaccinations, about being vaccinated or not vaccinated, we have allowed words to have become so powerful that they are now being weaponized. And in particular, we are talking about racism and we're talking about white supremacy. And so we've been sharing our thoughts about how that has been transforming in our lives. And next week, we're going to get into how the scientific world, because that's where Darwin dominated, where that actually began to change the way that race was viewed in humanity once science began to make its own statements. And an example of that is now we're having now, just only now, is science agreeing that life begins at conception. Why? Because they can see it, right? They can see it through all the different machinery that they have. They can test the DNA. There are 2 different DNAs now in the woman's body, her and that child. And so now we're having scientific proof that life begins at conception. Well, when Roe v. Wade happened, we didn't really have that. So it was kind of debatable. Whose word are you going to believe? And well, the woman, it's my body. I also think what's playing an interesting piece in defining words is the definition of a woman. How are you going to change the definition of a woman?
Right.
But media is doing that. The people that control the media
Right.
are doing that. And so I'm so cautious about us even using the word left, because that's a word, leftist, liberal. That is a word that we've applied to people.
True.
And so really, what is a leftist? And what is a right? Now it's a right wing, right? You're left wing or right wing, which implies you're fanatical. And so we've taken words and sculpted our community and sculpted the visions. We have created walls and environments and cities out of our words, and they have only done but to separate. So in these last few minutes, I want us to talk about how do we unify? How are we going to use words now to unify? Can we undo the things that words have already created?
Can you hear me? It's Daphne.
Yes, Daphne, go ahead.
Okay, I'm in Walmart if I get cut off. I believe just like what you just said, if we're either gonna go left or we're gonna go right. And for those of us who want to go right, we bond together, stick together. Those who go left, that's what happens. Eventually, things are going to turn again, and we're going to outnumber. Somebody's going to be left behind. Somebody's going to gain strength, and then they're going to outpower the other, the left or the right. And I think we just need to stick to where we are. And stand strong, and then that's how things are going to change. We're either going to accept it or we're not going to accept it. And I would never accept certain things. And that's just it. I just take a stand on it. And so what I'm getting out of this is just like you said, if you support something, you're going to go to the left side. If you don't support it, you're going to the right side. But what we have to be mindful of is that it's just like when you're voting, you're just drawing attention and drawing certain people to your side. But once those people cross over to your side, do you totally support those people? No. I mean, you just, like you just said, yes, it used to be white supremacy was totally European, totally white, and that's it. So now we're using words kind of to build up our defense mechanism or our defensive perimeter. Like in the military, I'm going to pull you over to my side, and that's it. And once I pull you over to my side, then there's going to be another battle because I'm not going to defend you or protect you or totally allow you in. It's the strongest of the people who convince those to come over to their side who's going to win. That's just how I see it. I'm sorry. That's it. I rest my mic.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's great, Daphne. Thank you for providing additional context and perspective here. I think that and we say it all the time that knowledge is power. So I think if we can just be conscious of how we create worlds, how we create movements, how we create philosophies, how we do that through words, and how others also create and frame a context via words, whether they're true or not. That for a lot of people, it doesn't matter. They want to provide or to shape a certain way of thinking, and they use created words and new distinctions, and they add to existing distinctions in order to reframe a context. And so if we can just be aware of what they're doing and how they're doing it, then we could be that more the wiser to not fall for the okie doke, so to speak, when it's something that really doesn't resonate strongly with us. In other words, we know that this is a manipulation. We know that these people are using these words to try to, manipulate my heartstrings, or to get me to act a particular way, or protest in a particular way, or gin up the base, whatever they're going to do. If we can just understand what's really going on, and that's the power of what we're talking about today, and the power of this room today, is to really help us to recognize what's happening. It's happening in language first, and then the action precedes that. And if we can just be aware of how it's happening in language, then we could be all the wiser to help our friends, family, community members, and others to not get sucked into a cultural narrative that really is destructive, not only to the communities that we want to support, but also to all of those that are a part of it. So I think that's the real power of this talk today. So
thank you, Kevin. We had a guest join the platform. Did you have something you want to say, or just hear better?
No, here. Thank you for inviting me up. I just want to just flag something that I've read in the book, which for me kind of really, it really homes into a define for me in terms of where we're at. And it says here, race was an invented linguistic distinction, but it has become the genesis of some of the most historical negative outcomes that we still are trying to work through to this very day. And I never ever thought about the word race, and I mean, you've got a lovely define here on page 20. Never really thought about the word race, but how when I think about it, I actually have this hostility attached to that word. And as you're speaking about media, is that what I've been exposed to all this time through my sort of 50 odd years? Is when I see the word race, I associate it to hostility, because as you've said here, the negative outcomes. But I just want to say thank you, because it's actually made me think about how I as a Black person actually define that word for myself.
Yeah.
So thank you to Kevin and the other authors. Thank you, Regina.
Minister Jackie, if I could put you on the spot, what's the difference you find in the UK and America? Is there a difference in how race is used or weaponized that you can see from your vantage point in UK?
Right. For us here in the UK, it's undercover, but it's still very much there. I can say as a child, I too was told, oh, you stink, you smell, you're a monkey, eat a banana, go back to where you come from. So we don't hear that so blatantly. And so I'm going back like 52 years, you would hear that very much spoken out in this country. You don't hear that now. But the racism is there in the controlling forces, in governments. You see very few people of a different minority. It was surprising because I'll put it as this, that they kind of scanned some of the Queen's household, and I couldn't even see anybody that was of a different color. They were all of the same color. And that's the kind of message that is very much in your face. The financial industry, again, controlled by a certain race. So it's there, but it's just not so blatantly expressed as I would say. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you. And I want to play devil's advocate. So I'm saying this purposely now. I'm playing devil's advocate on purpose. So why do we have what did they call that term when in employment, when you had to hire a few Black people or a few people of color? What's that term, guys?
Affirmative action.
Yes. Okay. Let's look at affirmative action. Is that has to do with race, doesn't it? And so you may say, well, okay, we look at the financial market and there aren't any people of color. So that's wrong. So you need to hire people of color. But what if the people of color were not able to get the education because they didn't have access for some systemic reasons that may be happening in their community that made it harder for them to get an education, to graduate, to go on to graduate,
and then get the opportunity to the enlisted to work so they could get the experience so that they could make the high paying jobs. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, we need to see more people of color, but is it putting in affirmative action, or is it more about making sure that the public school system is better, or that children have access to a better education, or how about stability in homes? We've talked, like I think in our first broadcast, about how back in the 50s and 60s, there was two-parent households. Black communities had a high percentage of two-parent household and literacy rates. But once that started to become destabilized, things started to shatter. And so setting affirmative action rules, is that really helping equality? Is it what is that? And so Neil, I'm going to call on you first.
rephrase the statement in the form of a question.
Neil, tell us about affirmative action, and is that really valuable to people of color?
Well, there is this thing. Hey, we need affirmative action because we need to equalize the consequence of racism and the years of the fact that Blacks and certain indigenous peoples have been isolated and pushed down and oppressed. So I can see the reasoning for it, but it turns out that whenever the government does something, it does a very lousy job of it. So what happens with affirmative action is, rather than helping one group of people, it ends up allowing them to lower their standards in many cases, and it can actually hurt people. For one example, let's say you say, hey, we have to have affirmative action, so everybody who comes to this university, you have to represent the demographic of the actual nation in this university. Well, the problem is, if you've got schools that are not functioning well, and you've got Black students who are coming out with a literacy rate of 17%, and then you say, no, you've got to give these people entry into these colleges, then you're doing two things. One, you're actually hurting these kids because they come to college and they just can't cope and they give up. When in actual fact, had they gone into a different college, a college that was prepared to help them, bring them up to the level they were, then maybe after that they could have gone to a Yale or a Harvard. Or you're going to dumb down the requirements for Yale and Harvard, and then you dumb down the requirements for everybody. So nobody's really helped by this because the government has this one-size-fits-all kind of idea to fix things. And then everybody gets angry, everybody gets hurt, nobody gets help, and a lot of money gets wasted. So that's one of the issues of affirmative action. The second part of affirmative action is it is immoral to apply affirmative action to private corporations. I believe, as much as I hate the fact that somebody would want to discriminate me, I can assure you I do not want to go to a restaurant or work at a company where people don't like me. There's a story I tell years ago when I first came to the States. I was working for a company named AMD. And this is back in the 80s. And my cousin used to work there too. And I remember having this conversation. I said, wow, we're just working for a paycheck. The only way to get rich in America is you've got to start your own company. At which point my cousin said, yeah, but there's a problem there. You see, the only people who will get funding to start a new company is this white guy with a big red nose who drinks beer with all the other venture capitalists. And I said, well, that shouldn't be a problem. We just need to find one of these white guys, give him a percentage of our company and let him be the CEO. And we'll do all the work behind it. And then we'll get our company going. Now, while I was saying that, my nephew was sitting on the floor listening to us, and he was about 14 or 15. He looked at me and says, well, that's not right. And I looked at him and I said, I don't care if it's right or not. If that's the only way we're going to get ahead, let us do that. And then eventually we'll have people of our ilk, people who look like us, doing the funding because they've been able to make money in the system. And now you can fund it. Now, as some of you know, I'm Indian of ethnicity. Well, here we are 15 years later. And of course, a few years later, my cousin and I, I think it was about 12 years later, my cousin and I did start our own company. We raised $15 million from venture capitalists. But guess what? When we went to the venture capitalists, almost every venture capitalist firm was populated by Indians. The Indians had done exactly that. They had gone in, brought the white guy in for the front face, and then they used the system to get to the top, and now they were controlling the system. And that's, I think, the way to do it. On the other hand, had we gone to the government and says, hey, you've got to let Indians into the game, I don't know where we'd be, but we certainly wouldn't be where we have some of the wealthiest people in Silicon Valley are Indian.
Regina, can I chime in here?
Yes, of course.
Neil, you've got me jumping up and down over here screaming. So saying amen, I'm in the amen corner. As it relates to my parents, my father's 91, my mom will be 90 in about a month and a half. And there was no affirmative action program or anything for them when they first started out looking to purchase a home in Los Angeles. So to make a long story short, my parents were the first Blacks to move onto their street in the Los Angeles area back in the late 1950s. How did they do that? They found a way. They found a real estate agent and broker who was sympathetic to their cause, and she made sure that the property that she owned on that particular street, she sold it to my parents. So my parents were the first Blacks to move on that street. Well, guess what happened after that? Other Blacks moved on the street. And by the time my parents left that particular community and moved to another community where they did, in essence, the same thing, that community had become a majority Black. Americans, or specifically Christian Americans, find a way.
Yeah.
And there's that, what I call the God quotient. If you are a Christian, there are no barriers that you can't overcome because you are a Christian, and you know what the Word of God says about us being a Christian. Are there obstacles that you have to deal with? Certainly. I was in Silicon Valley. I'm a little bit older than Neil, not a whole lot, but I often was the only one, but I never let it deter me because I know there is a God that I serve, and He's the final arbiter in the affairs of man. And as you stated, Neil, if you're waiting around for government to make it right for you, you got a long wait, and it's seldom going to be right. It's going to cost you a lot of money because that's just tends to be how government operates. I'm not anti-government. I just understand so acutely that you can make a way if you find a way. The home my parents moved to in West Los Angeles, which is where their dream home was right next door to a couple who were the first family to move into the community that weren't white, and they found a way. And I think I mentioned this on previous broadcasts that we've had. And he was a garbage man, and she was a stay-at-home mom, but he was a very shrewd businessman, and he found a way to purchase that dream home for his wife. And that's the truer picture of us as Americans of whatever ethnicity, but specifically those of us, what I like to say is have the darker paint job, Black Americans. We find a way, and we always have. Civil rights movement was not driven by government. It was driven by Black folk and a whole lot of other people as well within the church who believed in God and found a way.
Now, let me jump in right there. The Woolworths, remember the Woolworths counter-strike? There was no law. Woolworths capitulated because they realized that 10% of all their profits came from Black people. They couldn't afford, their stocks could not afford a 10% drop in income, right? So it had nothing to do with government. The government came in much later. In fact, even seat belts. A lot of companies brought in seat belts and safety standards long before the government did. In fact, when the government steps in, it usually makes things worse because then they just have to meet the regulation. When the government came in and said, you know, your bumpers have to withstand 5 miles of an accident without any damage, a lot of car companies were at 25 miles of before the bumper received any damage. And they said, well, that's a government standard, and they backed down their safety standard. So if you let the public sector, the private sector do their job, they actually exceed demands because they want to reach out. They want to make sure you're happy. They want to make sure you're coming back. And they want to make sure that you are healthy because that way they'll have repeat customers.
That's good.
But if the government does it, they don't care.
That's good. We went on affirmative action because of something that Jackie prompted in me. We did move away from the power of words. Well, I don't really think we moved too far off topic, but we are discussing the power of words, and we are going to wrap it up. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to share? Just raise your hand, and we'll bring you up. We'd love to hear from you as we are discussing the power of words, how racism, the word white supremacy, how that has been crafted and affected our community. And it was powerful what Jackie was saying about race, which Kevin wrote in his book. It has now taken on almost like you don't want to answer. Sometimes if I'm filling out an application or if I'm applying for something, I almost don't want to say race because I don't know if that will help or hurt me. And it seems like that should never have to be a question. It seems like it shouldn't matter, right? But when did we start asking about that, Neil? Do you know when we started doing population status? Because I remember ethnicity and race, they weren't always on applications.
I believe it was, it came about because the government required companies and people to explain how they were meeting the affirmative action. So I don't know what year it was, but it started with all that. So they were like, okay, let's see if people are really obeying us. Anytime the government asks you to do something, it comes with a lot of paperwork, and that was one of the first things they did. I don't know what year that was, but it started, and it started slow and then expanded and expanded. You know, every time somebody comes to office, they're like, well, I need to justify my existence as a legislator, so let me pass new laws. And that's how most of those ended up.
Got it. Okay. We went over a little bit, but that is certainly okay. We're just going to do a round robin. So we'll start with Kevin, Lonnie, and Neil, just kind of giving some closing thoughts on today's discussion. Anything that you have as a takeaway that you want to speak on. So we'll start with Kevin first.
All right. So my main takeaway is, man, this was a very important and very interesting discussion. So I hope that all of the participants actually, got a lot out of it. We did cover a lot and went into detail about how language affects the way that we live, the way that we see the world, the way that we interact with the world. And so if we just kind of keep that in mind, that just because people present caricatures and frame the world a particular way doesn't mean that it's true. As a matter of fact, we need to have a healthy suspicion about what they're trying to do when they create these new distinctions and new ways to sort of envision what they would want us to envision. So I'm just hoping that we be wise as serpents and gentle as doves as we go forward to protect ourselves and our family members and our communities from being swept into something just because it sounds right. And so I hope that this was useful for that purpose.
Regina, can I go now?
Yes, Lonnie.
Okay.
You don't have to ask permission.
All righty. This may be a little off topic, but I wanted to mention only because Jackie spoke up earlier, and she's from Great Britain. I recently learned that all things have to do with, we're speaking about words and then also perception of those words. And I was not aware, but someone pointed this out to me that England had two Black queens. One was Queen Charlotte, and the other was Queen Philippa. And I was not aware of that. So the perceptions with the demise of Queen Elizabeth obviously is on everyone's mind right now, that within the history, there were two Black queens. So I just wanted to point that out as we're talking about words and the perception of those words. I found that interesting.
Wow.
Neil.
Oh, I think I've said enough.
Okay.
Okay, Neil thinks he's said enough. All right, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us today as we had a discussion. And if you popped in and you popped in late, be sure to click the greenhouse on Y'all Woke Up so you'll get notified when we open a room. We are here every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we discuss just about an hour. And we are meticulously going through Kevin's book, Woke Up. There should be information on the description of Y'all Woke Up, or if you click on Kevin's profile, you should also find that information how to get the book, but you can buy it on Amazon. And next week, we will be getting into part 2 of chapter 2, which really gets into the scientific world and Darwin and how his research and statements are what we believe really launched the evilness of white supremacy and racism, because of all the different people who took his research and formed it as a foundation and justification for their actions, such as Hitler and Marxists and many others. So we thank you all for joining us today. We want you to know that this room is recorded, but we are also editing it, and you can find it on any of your podcast platforms. And you can also find it on our Facebook page and YouTube channel as well. And so I want to thank everyone once again. If there are no last thoughts or questions, we're going to close the room. Okay. This room will be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you, everyone.